Greetings, my friends. Tell me which city and country you're watching from. I'd love to read your comments. And of course, don't forget to share the video. Your support is invaluable. Let's go. Lana and Paul sat together in the departure lounge, waiting for Flight 2467 to Bali. Their fingers rested lightly intertwined, the tension of recent weeks slowly melting away now that every detail was finalized. Months of planning, endless checklists, and covert coordination had led to this moment. Lana tilted her head back and closed her eyes. A sleepless night and the remnants of their recent closeness clung to her like a second skin. This getaway couldn't have been more perfectly timed. 2 weeks of sun, silence, and no obligations. It was exactly what she needed before returning to the chaos that awaited her. Paul's hand shifted as his phone buzzed. He reached into his pocket, glancing at the screen. "Don't forget to turn on airplane mode," he murmured, not really looking at her. "I didn't bring my phone," she replied. But Paul's attention had already shifted, his eyes narrowing at whatever he saw. Lana caught the change in his expression. Her relaxed posture tensed. "What is it?" He silently handed her the phone. A single message was displayed. "Paul Ainsley, touch that woman and you'll regret it forever." Lana blinked. "Are you kidding me right now?" "She must have found out," Paul muttered, scanning the terminal with growing anxiety. "That's impossible," he added quickly. "I packed everything after she fell asleep, loaded the car without making a sound. When I got in bed, she practically jumped me. Then she kissed me goodbye like any other day. None of this adds up." Lana glanced around too, unsettled. "Could be a misdialed number," she offered, though she didn't sound convinced. "It says my full name," Paul said flatly. Lana frowned. "Could it be my husband?" Paul shook his head. "Come on. He thinks you're stuck in a hotel ballroom at some corporate workshop. He doesn't have my number, and we've been careful." He studied the unfamiliar number again. "None of my friends would pull something this weird." Lana leaned in, voice low. "Let's split up for a minute. You try. I'll figure out a way to check in with my husband." Paul tapped her number and put the phone on speaker. It rang until her voicemail answered. He left a short, cheerful message. "Already missing you," before hanging up, his brow furrowed. "You going to try calling him?" he asked Lana. "I told you, I left my phone at home. You can use mine." Lana reached out, then paused. Her fingers hovered, then dropped. Silence fell between them as they both seemed to realize what it would mean to make that call. A new weight settled over them, an unfamiliar, growing apprehension. The boarding call interrupted the moment. They stood and joined the queue without a word. The intimacy they had displayed so casually earlier now seemed off limits. Lana caught Paul scanning the passengers around them, alert and uneasy. She stifled a smirk. He was spooked. Even as they stepped down the jet bridge, Paul kept stealing glances behind them, as though someone might emerge from the crowd. Once settled in their seats, Lana linked her arm through his and rested her head on his shoulder. "So," Paul asked softly, "why didn't you bring your phone?" Lana turned to him with a sly grin. "Because I have a plan. You'll see." As the plane leveled off and the seatbelt sign dinged off, Lana pulled out her laptop. After a few clicks, she turned the screen toward Paul. "I made a choice," she said. "An investment in what we're building. By tonight, my husband will read this letter. If he understands, if he agrees, we lose nothing. We gain everything. If not, then we move on." She angled the screen so he could read. "To my husband, for 25 years, I've loved you deeply. That love remains, and I hope to share another 25 with you. I've given myself completely, to our marriage, to our children, to you. And in return, all I've ever asked for is your love and attention. You've given both generously. I know your heart wants only what's best for me. So today, I ask for something difficult, something radical. This letter is timed precisely. I need you to sit with it, alone, without my presence clouding your reaction. If I had said this in person, your first instinct might be defensive. I need you to consider it on your own terms. That's why I didn't take my phone. I need your thoughts unfiltered, untouched by my voice or my presence. No one knows where I am. I'm not attending any work event. I've left with someone else, someone you've never met. And before you draw conclusions, know this. I have never betrayed you. I'm not betraying you now. I won't, not unless you say it's acceptable. Here is what I'm asking for. Your permission to explore intimacy with others. I love you. I always will. You are still my anchor, my home, the center of my world. But my desires, my identity, have expanded in ways I can't ignore. This isn't about your inadequacy. It's about my evolution. I will be discreet. You'll never know details unless you ask. If I sense anyone suspects, I will stop. You will always come first. You will always have access to me, my body, my heart, my loyalty. That remains unchanged. This will not damage what we have, not emotionally, not physically, not spiritually. Please take this time to think. If you love me truly, you'll understand. Every night I sleep away from you, I'll be thinking about how much you love me, and waiting to see if you'll let me love you and myself fully. Always, with love. Please, my love, take the next couple of weeks to really consider everything. If you ultimately decide against it, I'll honor that, and I'd still appreciate the chance to keep the conversation going. I'll do my best not to let the accusations or your lack of trust hurt too much. But if your answer is yes, just say the word. We'll never have to revisit it, unless you want to. Always yours, Lana. Paul lowered the letter and released a slow breath. Wow, that's intense. Right? Lana replied with a half smile. I'll be honest, I drew heavy inspiration from a story I read on a risque fiction site. The author, Biggie33, opened with something like, "We need to have a serious talk." Paul tilted his head. Why'd you describe it as investing in our future? Isn't it obvious? She said, eyebrows raised. I asked my husband for permission to sleep with another man. If he says yes, we go back home and move forward. Fresh start, no guilt. In the back of her mind, she added, at least I'll be starting fresh. 2 weeks with you should tell me whether I've truly let go, but whether I've found someone to replace him, that's the real unknown. You really think he'll agree? Paul asked. Without a doubt. I made it sound like he has a choice, but it's just to let him feel like he's steering the wheel. If he says no, we slip back into secrecy, just like before. Paul gave her a look. That's cold-blooded, but effective. Lana shrugged nonchalantly. This isn't about feelings, it's about planning. But here's the thing, Paul said, voice measured. He's not going to weigh this out like it's a business proposal. He's a man. And if he's anything like most men, that letter's going to cut deep. Cut? She repeated, almost playfully. Yes. Even if you didn't say it outright, the implication is there. You're telling him he's not enough anymore. And no matter what he does, he never will be. That kind of thing lingers. Lana raised a doubtful eyebrow. Every guy wrestles with that fear, Paul went on. Whether we admit it or not, the thought that someone out there might be better, it's a hard pill to swallow. So what's your prediction? She asked. Only 2 ways it goes. He gives in or he fights back. Lana shook her head. You don't understand him. He'll value the honesty. As long as I ask before doing anything, there's no real danger. Paul watched her closely. She meant every word. And in that moment, he saw her differently, not just as someone chasing an adventure, but as someone capable of precise, deliberate manipulation. He'd bent the truth to convince his own wife, but Lana had redefined what honesty even meant. He was both impressed and unsettled. Out of a mix of mischief and sincere interest, Paul asked, So, how did that story by Biggie33 end? You mean, did the woman get what she wanted? Lana's expression darkened slightly before she answered. No. Her husband kicked her out. Sensing her confidence waver, Paul quickly changed the subject, not wanting to spook her into reconsidering. "Did I mention the weird guy I saw at the airport?" "No," Lana said, forcing a casual tone. "What happened?" "I was standing in line for international check-in, and I noticed this guy maybe 25 meters off just watching me. When I glanced back, he drew his finger across his throat, like a threat. I turned to see if someone else was behind me, but there was no one. It gave me chills." Lana's brow furrowed. "That is creepy. What did he look like?" "Pretty average. Tall, maybe over 6 feet, dark hair, a goatee. Nothing flashy." He paused as Lana suddenly straightened, switched on her laptop, and clicked through several folders before pulling up a picture. Her and a man outside a house. Her voice was tight. "Was this him?" Paul leaned in. "Could be. Looks similar, but I can't say for sure." Lana stared at him, scanning his expression. Was he telling the truth? Or was he planting doubt on purpose, hoping she'd stay scared and not end things early? For the first time, it crossed her mind. Paul, a man who'd already betrayed his own marriage, might not be as honest as he appeared. "What was he wearing?" she pressed. Paul let out a sigh. "That's the difference between men and women. We never remember what other guys are wearing." "You said he dropped you at the domestic terminal, right?" "Yeah. I told him to leave me there. After he drove off, I hopped a shuttle over to International." "So for him to find you," Lana said slowly, "he would have had to loop back, drive around the airport, find new parking, and somehow spot you in the crowd at check-in? That's a stretch." "Exactly," Paul said. "Most likely it was just some random nutcase." Still, he could see the anxiety lingering in her eyes. He pointed to the photo. "Is that your house?" Lana, who was used to compliments about her home and welcomed any opportunity to shift her thoughts elsewhere, began speaking with a practiced ease. "Yeah, this is it. Not bad, right? We bought the lot on the coast a long time ago just as an investment. It's on a steep, narrow plot. You wouldn't guess it, but technically the whole place is movable. My husband spent 15 years putting it together bit by bit, landscaping, renovating, adding touches here and there." She gave a knowing smile. "Wait till you see inside. He's an artist. Each room feels like stepping into a different world." The bathrooms and living area followed a maritime theme. The study? A model of sharp, business-like precision. The atmosphere demanded focus the moment you entered. As for the master bedroom, she laughed and kept its design a mystery. They'd even been recognized with several design accolades for how skillfully the house blended into its rugged setting. A stream, she noted with pride, actually ran beneath the structure. Eventually their talk drifted toward more personal territory, one both had instinctively sidestepped until then: family. Paul spoke of his 2 young children, aged 6 and 8. Lana spoke about her own 3. Sierra, who had just finished law school at 23 and was now working as a property lawyer, and her 2 sons still at home, Dorian, 16, and Logan, 13. Without realizing it, Lana was trying to keep her thoughts elsewhere. And for a while, it worked. Then her hand reached for a notepad, and she scribbled 3 words: lawyer, home, children. Whether her husband had guessed what she was up to, she didn't know. That not knowing left her frozen. She couldn't anticipate him, only shield what mattered most: her family and her house. As the silence between her and Paul grew heavier, Lana's inner thoughts turned against her. She accused herself of being weak, of failing to consider the consequences. Her mind began retracing the last few days. Thursday night, she packed, carefully avoiding anything provocative or revealing. No swimsuits, no lingerie. She'd buy those in Bali. That night had felt entirely ordinary. Her husband had noticed nothing. They'd even been intimate. Friday followed its usual routine. She left for the office at the normal hour. Since her work vehicle was in the shop, she'd arranged for her husband to pick her up. He came inside, waited patiently while she wrapped up, then drove her home. They had lunch with the kids, brought them to their grandparents, and spent the rest of the afternoon in bed. Her desire had only grown stronger, fueled by the thrill of what was about to happen, and his complete lack of suspicion. Saturday started early. They headed to the airport together. Lana remembered the unease she felt as she casually suggested he just help with her luggage and go. Normally, he stayed until the plane boarded. She was relieved when he agreed without protest. She watched him walk to his car, waited as he backed out and drove off. Now, what had felt like excitement seemed laced with something darker. She replayed his seemingly innocent actions in her mind and measured them against her own calculated decisions. No one at work had the full story. They believed she was on vacation. Her husband had no connections to her colleagues. There was no path back to the truth from where he stood. The message Paul got on his phone? Probably a joke from someone. The stranger staring at him in the terminal? Likely just some unstable traveler. Breathe, Lana. Calm down. But what if he did figure it out? She'd lied about her destination. But was that really so serious? Her note said she was traveling with a coworker. She hadn't specified who. She didn't even realize she'd closed her eyes, only noticed when she opened them again. She pictured her husband finding out where she'd actually gone. To him, it might seem like she'd vanished on purpose, that she had something to conceal. Just the appearance of that could be damaging. Still, if she played it carefully, she could talk her way through it. But that letter, the one she'd left beneath his pillow, there was no misinterpreting that. The rest of the flight turned into a mental exercise in damage control. Step 1, find a way to destroy the letter at home, 1,500 miles away. Step 2, convince herself that this rising panic was only paranoia. Always thinking ahead, Lana composed a message to Sierra. She wouldn't be able to send it until they arrived in Bali, but she wrote it all the same. In it, she pleaded with her daughter to go to the house and do 2 specific things. First, get her phone and swap it for Paul's number. She'd tell everyone she'd left her own phone behind and was using a prepaid. Second, find the letter tucked beneath her father's pillow and remove it. She asked Sierra not to read the letter, insisting it was personal, a matter strictly between husband and wife. They were close. Lana trusted Sierra implicitly. She believed, without question, that her daughter would follow through and stay silent. At the end of the note, she asked Sierra to confirm once everything was done, just so she could breathe easier. As soon as she and Paul landed at Denpasar Airport, Lana jumped into action. She emailed Sierra, then used Paul's phone to call her husband, sure he wouldn't recognize the number. Despite her persistent efforts, Lana couldn't reach anyone. Not during the frustratingly slow process of getting through customs, nor throughout the cab ride to the hotel. This kind of radio silence was unprecedented, and a gnawing sense of dread began to take root. When the taxi finally rolled to a stop in front of their hotel, she made another attempt to call Paul. This time, Sierra answered. She confirmed that she had done exactly what had been asked of her. Lana treaded carefully, revealing as little as possible in her responses. But when Sierra inquired about her father's well-being, the answer left Lana chilled. Sierra explained that her father had phoned earlier, said he needed space to think, and had taken the other kids with him to the family's secluded cabin in the countryside. She mentioned that she planned to meet them there later that evening. Lana recalled that when she'd last spoken to her husband about the weekend, he had said nothing about the cabin. What troubled her more was the fact that the area had no phone reception or internet access. Though the situation was already unsettling, Lana was too disoriented to stop Sierra from going. Back at the cabin, Lana's husband had just finished barbecuing dinner for their 3 younger children, who were now eagerly begging him to take them camping the next day to hunt wallabies for a stew they loved. Since Sierra's arrival, she had noticed her father seemed distant, but she decided not to press him about it. After dinner, they gathered together inside. The atmosphere was heavy until Sierra broke the silence. "Is this about Mom?" she asked gently. He gave a weary nod. She hasn't been herself lately. Cold, preoccupied. And just yesterday, and again this morning, I came across some things that don't sit right with me. He exhaled slowly, the weight in his chest evident. Normally composed and warm, he now seemed shaken to his core. The children waited, tense and quiet, She told me she'd be gone for a 2-week training program abroad, he said. The kids nodded. They'd all heard the same story. Yesterday, he went on, she asked me to pick her up from the office. While I waited in the lobby, I spotted her through a glass wall. She was in a meeting with a man. The way they interacted, too close, too casual. It felt off. She didn't come out right away, so I wandered around the reception. On one of the walls, I saw photos of the senior staff. I recognized the man she'd been talking to. It was Paul Ainsley. I grabbed his business card from the front desk. He took a breath before continuing. This morning, I woke up early. Couldn't sleep. I know it was wrong, but I looked in her handbag. I found her passport. It had a visa stamp, Indonesia, dated 3 weeks ago. I remembered seeing her leafing through a Bali travel brochure not long ago. He looked around, gauging how much more to share. Bali isn't a neighboring state. It's a different country. She never told me she was going overseas. I haven't confronted her yet. You don't accuse someone you love of betrayal without proof. Sierra spoke softly. We get it, Dad. You and Mom always taught us to value truth, to be loyal, to never betray trust. And if someone did, to walk away quietly. He gave her a solemn nod. That's why this is so hard. When she asked me to drop her at the domestic terminal, she said she was nervous about leaving the house to us for so long. I agreed, but instead, I drove to the international terminal. I waited by the Bali flight check-in counter. I saw Paul Ainsley arrive first. I stayed hidden. 15 minutes later, your mom showed up. She was flying out too. I was stunned. I couldn't even speak. Do you think? Sierra began to ask. Yes, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I think she lied to us. I think she's in Bali, with him. He turned away, but his trembling shoulders betrayed his inner turmoil. None of them had ever seen him this broken. One by one, starting with Dorian, the kids wrapped their arms around him. After a long pause, Sierra asked, What are you going to do? I don't know, he said honestly. If she's cheated, it's over. That I can't forgive. But even if she hasn't gone that far, just knowing she could deceive us like this, I don't know if I can stay. For now, I've sent them both a message, a warning. If they cross a line, there will be consequences. That buys me time to decide what to do. Does that make sense? Everyone nodded, quietly standing with him. Then Sierra added something he hadn't expected. She didn't take her phone with her, Dad. She probably never saw your message. I can get in touch with her, she said. Want me to tell her to stay away from him? He shook his head gently. No, honey. She has to make that decision herself. If she only stops because she's afraid, it means nothing. It has to be her choice. What number did she give you? He asked. Sierra unlocked her phone, opened Lana's email, and read the first 6 digits aloud. Her father finished the number from memory, straight from Paul Ainsley's business card. With a single, unmistakable gesture, the truth of his story settled over the room like a curtain. The weight of silence that followed was absolute. That's not everything, Dad, his daughter murmured gently. Mom left a letter for you. She put it under her pillow and asked me to bring it. She opened her bag, pulled out the envelope, and extended it to him. Every eye was fixed on him, anticipation thick in the air. He scanned the letter briefly, then faltered, uncertain whether to read it out loud. It was young Logan who finally shattered the quiet. Dad, that letter affects all of us. We've always faced our biggest moments as a family. You owe us the full truth. Derek turned to his youngest son, pride welling up inside him. In the middle of what might be the most painful chapter in their family's history, his children were showing a resilience he hadn't foreseen, especially Logan. They were united. They were ready. He pulled his son into a brief embrace, then unfolded the paper and began to read. He went through it 3 times, his focus drawn again and again to a particular passage, the 3rd paragraph, on the 2nd and 3rd readings. Had that one paragraph been missing, the letter might have read like a heartfelt, mature message from a wife to her husband. But one line disrupted everything. I'm leaving for 2 weeks with a co-worker. I've never been unfaithful to you, and I won't be, unless you give me your full permission. That sentence twisted the entire letter's meaning. A single deceptive line had the power to cast doubt on everything else. What followed was an intense hour of measured discussion. They dissected motives, read between the lines, and entertained every possible explanation. In the end, after all avenues were explored, the truth stood out plainly. Their path forward depended on one critical answer. If their worst suspicions were confirmed, their mother's place in the family might no longer be assured. Trying to maintain fairness toward someone absent and unable to defend herself, Derek spoke gently. Listen, kids, if she's done anything wrong, it was a betrayal against me. That doesn't mean your relationship with her has to change. But Logan, again speaking for them all, replied firmly, No, Dad. The moment she lied to us all, she stepped outside this family on her own. Derek looked at his son, struck by the unshakable resolve in the boy's face, the tightened jaw, the unwavering eyes. It was like looking in a mirror from decades ago. At the hotel front desk, Lana caught Paul off guard by booking a separate room on another floor. She'd reserved it for 2 nights, with the option to stay longer and the right to keep the room if the hotel became full. Paul checked in next, eyeing Lana with a puzzled look. She told him to take his time, get comfortable, and meet her in the lobby in 2 hours. He nodded, a bit unsure. Later that evening, when they met again, Paul didn't waste energy overthinking. But when he saw Lana's outfit, his hopes for a more intimate evening instantly rose. Their connection had been building steadily over the past month. There had been touches, kisses, moments of heat, but nothing more. What's going on, Lana? He asked, brows furrowed. Think this through, Paul, she replied in a low, measured tone. We planned this getaway together. Then, right before the trip, you get a message, clearly aimed at you, warning you that if you lay a finger on me, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. That came not long after a man, looking disturbingly like my husband, made a threatening move in your direction. Are you seeing the pattern? She pressed on. On the way here, my daughter told me that my husband's behavior has been completely off. And for the last 3 hours, he hasn't returned any of my calls, which is very unlike him. Paul wasn't dense. He quickly understood the implications, even if he couldn't see exactly how he fit into the center of it. I'd say there's an 80% chance he knows where we are and why we're here, Lana said calmly. Don't ask me how he knows. I honestly don't have a clue. But this much I'm sure of. If he finds out we've slept together, our marriage is over. And I'm not ready for that. If I knew for certain that he was aware, I'd be on a plane right now. But if I leave, and it turns out he doesn't know, how do I explain coming back early without lying? We've been married 25 years. He'll smell a lie in seconds, especially if he's already suspicious. She looked at Paul earnestly. I'm sorry, Paul. We're not doing this. Not until I talk to him and know for sure he's in the dark. Paul's frustration was visible. Lana could practically see the argument forming in his mind. She stopped it with a raised hand. Let me ask you something. If you suspected your wife was traveling with another man, what would you do? Simple, Paul said. I'd hire a private investigator and get the facts. Lana saw the clarity cut through the fog of his emotions. It had taken longer than she wanted, but it finally hit. Did you try calling your wife after we arrived? She asked, her tone sharp. That hit the mark. Paul immediately scanned the lobby, eyes darting to the corners, suddenly alert to the possibility of being watched. Now you see, Lana said. Tonight and tomorrow, I'll be alone in my room. When my husband finally calls me back, we'll sort things out. Until then, don't come to my room, don't meet me anywhere private, and definitely don't touch me. If he calls, don't answer. Let it go to voicemail and come find me right away. These are the numbers he might use. She handed him a small slip of paper. Now give me a friendly kiss on the cheek, and we'll head our separate ways. Paul followed the instructions he'd been given to the letter. Once done, he and Lana quietly returned to their separate rooms, each subtly inspecting for any hints of surveillance. had either paused to investigate the number behind the ominous message Paul had received, they might have uncovered a harsh truth. Lana was already ensnared, unwittingly compromised, over 80%, and closing in on total exposure. It had been 4 days, and the getaway they had hoped would reset things was already off the rails. Rather than wandering through the city, they stayed close to the hotel, confining their outings to meals in the restaurant and consciously avoiding even the lightest touch. Despite Paul's reluctance, Lana pulled him along on a retail mission, bouncing between shops in search of new clothes. On Tuesday, they even played tourists for a day. If anyone was tailing them, they were highly skilled, ghosts in plain sight. Lana insisted they remain constantly together in case Derek tried to reach out. On Monday, she had picked up a disposable phone and drilled Paul on switching to it swiftly if needed. Her unease simmered beneath the surface. It was school break, and the possibility that Derek had taken Dorian and Logan to the lake house for a longer stay gnawed at her. But what gnawed at her more deeply was Sierra's total silence. No replies to messages, no contact at all. Paul waited until Tuesday evening before acting on his own sense of dread. Claiming he was turning in early, he quietly reserved a second room under an alias, slipped out, confirmed he wasn't being followed, and spent the night with a Javanese escort flown in from overseas. By Wednesday, Lana's nerves were stretched so tight she barely left her room. She immersed herself in research, zeroing in on the legal intricacies of divorce. Then she contacted the family's personal attorney, the one who usually handled their private affairs, and asked him to review her hypothetical conclusions about the legal ramifications. Though it wasn't his specialty, he said her logic appeared sound. Still, Derek and Sierra continued to ignore her. She called them 3 times daily, and not once did they answer. Her uncertainty escalated from mostly sure something's wrong to virtually convinced. Feeling emotionally cut off from those she cared most about, Lana sank into a profound loneliness. In a moment of despair, she sent Sierra a desperate, pleading email. She didn't bother reaching out to Derek through email. He never used it. By Friday, with no responses, Lana took action to safeguard what she could. She instructed the attorney, who held full legal authority on her behalf, to freeze the family's assets. The last undeveloped piece of property they owned was placed into a trust, listing her and Sierra as co-trustees, with either having access. Most of their financial assets were funneled into 2 newly created trusts, one for each of their underage children. These required both trustees' consent to be accessed. One trustee would be the child upon reaching adulthood, the other, she hoped, would be herself. But the lawyer advised her to appoint him instead as the trustee guardian, arguing it would offer greater legal stability. Since the kids couldn't legally sign anything until they turned 18, Lana would retain effective control for the time being. Feeling reassured that at least some control was still in her hands, and knowing the entire structure could be reversed if the crisis passed, Lana finally slept soundly for the first time in days. Then came Saturday. Within the span of an hour, 2 devastating shocks shattered any sense of control she had gained. The first came with Paul's unannounced appearance at her door, despite her repeated warnings to stay away. Troubled by his wife's continued silence, he had asked his brother to check on her. The response chilled him. She had asked where the divorce documents should be sent. She'd also called Paul's office, only to find out he hadn't been on any official trip. He had taken personal leave. And just like that, Derek was in the loop. Knowing things had spiraled beyond his control, Paul booked the next flight home to face the consequences. Lana, moving fast, had her attorney finalize all legal shifts, drove Paul to the airport herself, and then took over the hotel room he'd vacated. The second revelation was far worse. That same afternoon, she decided to check in on the social media profiles of her 2 younger children. Since she'd left, there had been no updates, no messages, no activity, nothing to indicate they'd even noticed she was gone. Until now. Logan's page had a new post. It was stark, declarative, and impossible to miss. His parents were getting a divorce. Lana screamed. The sound was raw and full of despair, echoing into the lonely silence of a room where no one waited to comfort her. What was Derek thinking? Divorce wasn't something you posted like a life update. It was something you talked about. It required dialogue, painful, real, human conversation, tears, fights, maybe even forgiveness. But never this. Yes, Lana had been the primary breadwinner, the one who kept everything afloat while Derek floundered after high school, and she forged ahead through college. He had always spent more time with the kids, had left a bigger mark on their day-to-day lives. But this betrayal was a blow she couldn't rationalize away. In a quiet, gutted prayer, Lana cast her plea wide to any force that might listen. Help her see clearly. Help her stop this disaster before it ran off the edge. Help her and Paul find the strength to undo what they had set in motion. If things had taken a different turn, Derek would soon be reviewing a rock-solid report from a private investigator, confirming that nothing inappropriate had transpired. And now that Paul had exited the scene entirely, there was little chance anything ever would. As Lana's emotions began to settle, her thoughts sharpened. Alone with her silence and regret, she began to reassess everything, methodically, logically, trying to see the situation through Derek's eyes. Gradually, a picture began to form. Somehow, someone had found out about her planned escape to Bali. It couldn't have been Derek. The only record of the trip had been saved on the shared home computer, and Derek was practically a stranger to modern tech. The more likely scenario pointed to Paul's wife stumbling across the information and alerting Derek, possibly before Lana had even boarded her flight. From his standpoint, all he'd see was betrayal. That Lana had lied about where she was going and had jetted off with another man. Unless, of course, the letter had changed things. What if Sierra had ignored her instructions and opened it? Worse yet, what if she had shown it to Derek? Panic surged through Lana as she retrieved the letter and began scanning it frantically. It took her 3 attempts to make it through the pages, each read, heightening her anxiety. The opening paragraph was direct and fact-based, emotionally neutral. The next veered toward selective honesty, bending the truth without quite breaking it. But the third crossed the line, a cocktail of truths and fabrications that now threatened to ruin everything. In it, she'd described Paul as a passionate lover, but confessed to growing tired of his embrace. That line would be impossible to miss. It had screamed clarity to her when she wrote it. It would scream something very different to Derek. Any findings the investigator uncovered would inevitably question her decision to invite a male companion, particularly one her husband didn't even know existed. Seen through the cold prism of rational analysis, Lana suddenly grasped the depth of the damage. If Derek believed the letter had been dishonest from the beginning, then nothing else she'd ever said would be spared his doubt. All the times she had reassured him of her fidelity would now seem staged. Even the compliments about his prowess in bed would feel like calculated flattery. And then the real gut punch landed. Paul had been right all along. The true betrayal wasn't suspicion of infidelity. It was making Derek doubt whether he had ever truly been enough for her. That kind of insecurity ran deep. She hadn't crossed the line, at least not yet, and the investigators' records would reflect that. Still, that might not matter. Derek could easily assume the affair had started well before Bali. Thankfully, Lana had already laid the groundwork to counter that theory. The critical detail would be when surveillance had begun. If the investigator had started tracking from her hotel check-in, then the evidence would clearly show that she and Paul had stayed in separate rooms. But there were too many unknowns, too many loose ends. That 4th paragraph, once meant to be heartfelt and sincere, now came off as hollow, especially if Derek believed the entire letter was fabricated. In retrospect, the whole thing felt like a carefully worded disaster, full of sentiment but stripped of credibility. Lana found herself desperately hoping Derek had never read it. If he hadn't, then maybe, just maybe, there was something left to save. But if he had, no amount of spin would salvage her story. The cruel irony of it all almost made her laugh. At this stage, Her only potential savior was the private investigator and whatever documentation he had compiled proving her innocence, at least in terms of physical betrayal. She silently hoped he was as discreet and competent as she had assumed. So good, in fact, that he'd shadowed her movements without her detecting it, even though she'd known he might be watching. Lana cursed herself inwardly. Why had she taken such a reckless gamble? After a night dulled by wine and heavy reflection, Lana came to a sobering conclusion. She was exactly the woman she never wanted to become. She had the dream life, respectable job, a stable marriage, material comfort, but beneath the surface lay a pattern of manipulation, half-truths, and a longing for something more. Middle age loomed, and something raw had awakened in her. She thought she could feed that hunger without consequences, believing her cleverness and Derek's trust would shield her. But now, the irony no longer amused her. This wasn't leading to a thrilling affair, it was leading to a potential breakup. She might soon find herself not just a career-savvy woman, but a divorced one, left alone with the same unresolved desires. By the following morning, it was clear to Lana that Bali held no more answers. She made the decision to end her trip early and return home. Before flying back, she wanted to use her best skills, those honed through years of negotiations, to buy time, to delay Derek from doing anything final. She crafted a message, vague but emotionally weighted, and sent it through Sierra. She chose her words with care, saying just enough to provoke reflection, but not enough to expose herself further. She had no idea whether Sierra had read the letter or shared it with Derek. Her objective was simple: stall the divorce, retain some control, and stay positioned for whatever came next. Ever the planner, she had already located a therapist back home and scheduled a session. Then, composed and deliberate, she dressed for the tour she had planned days earlier. There would still be time to contact the airline. Sierra stepped into her father's home just in time to hear the end of a conversation drifting in from the living room. "So, aside from tipping off Paul's wife about your suspicions, what else did you do, Derek?" "Not a thing," he replied, nonchalant. "Hey, Sierra, you remember Jack Sorrell, right? Our neighbor. He's also a lawyer. He's been giving me a bit of advice." "Oh, for God's sake, Dad," Sierra muttered under her breath. "Given everything you've taught me over the years about landscaping and the countless times you loaned me your equipment, helping you out now feels like the very least I can do." "Hi, Sierra." "Hey, Jack. Are you here to help Dad with the whole thing about the divorce?" "Divorce? Let's not jump to conclusions," Jack replied. "No one's officially mentioned divorce yet. What we do know is that your mom disappeared for 2 weeks to Bali with another man. Until I hear her side, I'm holding off on judgment." Sierra gave a bitter laugh. "Don't mind my overly trusting father," she said to Jack. "He still sees the best in everyone. Just yesterday, Mom's lawyer had me sign off on a trust that stripped Dad of control over some family assets. Then we went through the financials and, surprise, most of the money is gone. She's already taking steps to protect herself and leave Dad exposed. Let's not pretend anymore. She's revealing exactly who she is." She passed 2 printed sheets to her father. He read them silently, then handed them over to Jack. "Dear Sierra, would you be so kind as to print the attached and pass it to your father? I trust you not to read it. It's strictly between him and me. Dear Derek, by now, I assume you've realized I wasn't honest about my trip or its purpose. When I return, I'd like for us to talk. I plan to apologize sincerely for what I now see was a serious lapse in judgment. Please, don't make any big decisions before we've had that conversation. Please remember these 2 things. I have loved only you from the beginning, and that hasn't changed. Since the day we made our commitment, I have never been physically involved with anyone else. I know recent events have shaken your trust in me. I'll do whatever it takes to earn it back. If you want me to take a polygraph test, I will, even on the way home from the airport if you arrange it. Ask me anything. Once we've cleared the air, I'll offer the apology you deserve for any pain or disrespect I've caused. Don't act rashly. We both understand what a divorce would bring. You'd lose the home you poured your heart into, and we'd split the savings we set aside for early retirement. Think about what this would mean for the kids. Divorce splits families apart, and you know that, more often than not, custody goes to the mother. Sierra and Dorian will almost certainly stand by me. And consider how this might affect Logan's bond with you. I know how much he means to you, and losing regular contact with him would be devastating. Please, just wait until we can talk face to face. With love, Lana Jack looked up after finishing the letter. If we didn't already know what was really happening behind the scenes, this would be extremely convincing. What are you implying? Derek asked. I've seen this play out dozens of times in my job, Jack said. It follows a pattern. The wife makes up her mind, finds someone new, takes a trial run, like this Bali trip, and if she decides he's worth it, she returns, quietly moves money out of reach, and files for divorce. The savvier ones take it further, he went on. They begin to chip away at the kid's loyalty to their other parent, exactly like Lana started doing with Sierra. Leaving that heartfelt letter around for her to find? That's no accident. That's manipulation. This is part of the playbook. Wear you down emotionally, separate you from people who might help, drain your finances, and then position the children to choose sides. In the end, he added with a heavy tone, they'll be forced to decide, live in their old home with their financially stable mom, or face uncertainty with their dad. There's got to be another explanation, Derek said, not sounding convinced. I doubt it, Jack responded. You want confirmation? Call the top 3 divorce attorneys in town. If any of them say they can't take your case, it's probably because she's already hired them, just to block you. She might have paid them just to make sure you can't. That's how this works. By the time you start looking for legal help, you're already boxed in and broke, and her plan is well underway. Derek's face tightened. So, what does that letter really mean? It's a diversion, Jack said flatly. She's trying to delay you. Her lawyer likely warned her that custody battles are tougher with older kids. And since you're the one more involved day to day, she's on uncertain ground. She's buying herself time. If she can act quickly enough, she'll try to file before Logan turns 14, before he gets a legal say in which parent he lives with. And next, Jack continued, she'll suggest counseling. In this country, divorce generally requires a year-long separation, or a counselor confirming the marriage can't be saved. Be ready for her to push for a therapist of her choosing and for those sessions to be anything but neutral. It's becoming more common now. Women initiating divorce use pressure and threats in counseling to fast-track everything. Derek excused himself from the chat and turned to Jack, asking who the most trusted divorce lawyer in town was. Once Jack gave him a name, Derek made the call, introduced himself, and requested an appointment. But the response wasn't what he expected. The firm declined to take him on. What Derek didn't know was that the attorney was overwhelmed with cases and had told staff to temporarily stop accepting new clients. He returned to the break room where Jack was waiting. All right, Jack, you were right. What's the next move? Jack didn't hesitate. First, you need to authorize me to freeze any assets Lana doesn't currently have access to. And after that? Derek asked. Then we restrict her access to the rest of the shared money. How am I supposed to do that? Step 1. Cancel every joint credit card. Derek paused, conflicted. This still feels wrong. She's so convincing when she tells me she still loves me. But then there's the second half of her letter, the part with the threats. That doesn't match up. His daughter Sierra chimed in. Dad, are you completely sure Mom's being honest with you? I am, Sierra. I believe she is. Would you lie to someone you love? No, never. Then what did you always say? That the foundation of any good relationship is love, trust, and respect, right? He nodded, more slowly this time. How many of those do you think are still in place? Maybe one. And how much of that is she showing you lately? He said nothing. Exactly. Lana tried to pay the change fee for her return flight, but both of her credit cards were declined. Alarmed, she dashed to the nearest ATM she had used in the past. Her attempt to withdraw cash was denied as well. That's when she knew. Something serious had changed. She switched into crisis mode. Thankfully, her hotel stay and meals had been paid for in advance, so she wouldn't be left starving or without shelter. She had a few $100s left in traveler's checks, but it was obvious they wouldn't last the week. With no close friends back home to turn to, her only viable option was her parents. But calling on them for help meant answering questions she wasn't ready to face. Instead, she quickly sent an email to her attorney, asking why her accounts had been frozen. Then she resigned herself to a week in limbo, cash-strapped and increasingly anxious, until her flight home. As she sat in the quiet of her hotel room, she stewed in the realization that what was meant to be a discreet, controlled getaway had spiraled out of control. What started as a minor lapse in judgment had now placed Derek's life and their family's stability at risk. She'd always known Derek would never tolerate betrayal, and yet she gambled, certain she was too smart to be caught. But what had triggered such a swift and aggressive reaction from him? Derek couldn't have had proof of an affair, especially since the man had already left and nothing physical had happened. He didn't manage their finances and was never involved in legal matters. He had always trusted her implicitly and left those responsibilities in her hands. Frustrated, she sat at the hotel desk and gently knocked her forehead against it, overwhelmed. 2 new emails appeared, each one a blow. The first was from Paul's wife, a venomous message full of sarcasm and rage, accusing her of destroying a marriage and threatening children's futures. It stung. But the second message struck even deeper. At first glance, it looked like a copy of an old email she had sent to Paul, excitedly planning a trip. The sender's and recipient's addresses were indicated. Underneath it was a single scathing line. "Why did you lie to us, Mom?" It was from her son Dorian. Derek might not have been tech-savvy, but the kids clearly were. In that moment, Lana understood that her betrayal had wounded more than just her husband. Her children were caught in the fallout. That question from Dorian wasn't just accusatory, it was proof of just how much damage she'd caused. Sierra's cold silence now seemed completely justified. Tears streamed down Lana's face as sorrow and regret washed over her. She hastily replied to Dorian, promising to explain everything once she got home. Dorian's response came almost instantly. "Funny how you picked our school break to take a trip with another man instead of spending time with us and Dad." That message cut deeper than the rest. The rest of the week crept by, empty and colorless. With no spending money, all Lana could do was sit under the sun. Even that became intolerable. After a short hour at the beach, she returned to her room, realizing that coming home with a tan would only underscore how well she'd lived while everyone else suffered. Frustrated and desperate, she sat down and wrote a long email to Sierra. She avoided explicit details but admitted to making poor choices. She spoke of feeling invisible, not just as a wife, but as a mother and the family's main provider. The email felt more like a controlled PR statement than a heartfelt apology. Twice, she made a point to mention that she had never physically cheated on Derek. She begged Sierra not to do anything rash until they could talk face to face. But despite her intention to connect, the message lacked real remorse. It read more like someone trying to maintain their footing than someone truly sorry. After hitting send, she was left with nothing to do but wait. "All right, kids," Derek began, gathering everyone in the living room. "We need to seriously talk about what's going to happen when your mom gets back. I honestly didn't expect her to be gone this long, but unless we hear something different, she's due home on Friday." "So, what's our plan?" he asked. "We only know that she left town with some guy from work. We don't know if this was the first time she lied or just the first time she got caught. Sierra, what do you think?" Sierra didn't hesitate. "I read the email she sent, Dad. That was all I needed. She doesn't see us as her family anymore. We're just problems she wants to escape. It doesn't matter whether this was her first lie or her 10th. What matters is that we clearly don't matter to her." She stood at a turning point in her life. The choice before her was stark: use her vacation days to reconnect with her children, or disappear on a whim with someone else. Her job, demanding and constantly uprooting her, had already created a wedge between her and her kids, Dorian and Logan. To be honest, the way she handled herself, both before and after everything surfaced, was like a punch to the gut. It felt like betrayal, plain and simple. If she doesn't start taking real accountability soon, I'm not sticking around. That's the truth, Sierra. Harsh, but real. What do you think, Dorian? I don't think she understands, Dad. I agree, sweetheart. Once we get Logan's thoughts, I'll explain the next steps. Logan? Whatever you decide, Dad. I just want to live with you. I'll make sure that happens, buddy. So, Dad, what's the plan? Well, here's what I've been working through. I think your mom lost her bearings somewhere along the line. I can't say for sure what caused it. Maybe that big promotion last year shook something loose in her. I need you two to be with me on this. If she owns up to her choices, if she truly shows remorse, maybe we give her one last chance. What do you say? Sierra turned toward her siblings. Their silent agreement was obvious. Younger kids need structure, at least until they're old enough to start pushing back against everything their parents stand for. You're right, Dad. We'll try. But you've read that last letter from her. I've gone through it more times than I can count. There's no trace of regret in it. Strangely enough, I do believe her when she says she never physically cheated on you. I feel the same way, Sierra. That's why I've come up with something that should open her eyes. When she goes through it, she'll finally understand that we already feel betrayed, deeply. I doubt she realizes how much damage she's done. She's only seeing the surface consequences. Once she's confronted with how we truly feel, the real question becomes, what will she do then? If she breaks down and gives us all a heartfelt apology, we might be willing to move forward. If she doesn't, well, then we'll deal with that when the time comes. That's my plan. The letter took Lana by surprise. Though Sierra's name was written on the envelope, it was obvious the message was meant for Derek and the kids as well. It clearly outlined when they expected her back. As she read it, an uncomfortable tightness gripped her chest, as though she'd already failed some invisible test. They were anticipating her arrival late Friday. The note mentioned she'd be undergoing a polygraph exam, with all 4 family members submitting questions. Following the test, she'd be staying in a motel for 2 nights to reflect before she could even request a family meeting scheduled for Saturday afternoon. Lana didn't like being told what to do, but for now, she'd play along. One thing was certain. Once she set aside her pride, she'd better be ready for whatever they threw at her. They clearly intended to remind her who was in control now. Still, a small part of her felt relieved. They had accepted her suggestion to take a polygraph. It was the only real opportunity she had to prove to Derek that she hadn't been unfaithful. And if she could convince him, the rest might follow. But what would he ask? He already knew the details about Bali. That much was obvious. What he really wanted to uncover was whether something had happened with Paul before the Bali trip. If he came out and asked whether she had slept with Paul, or with anyone besides her husband, she'd be in the clear. But she feared he might be more subtle, asking whether she had acted like a loyal wife. That was murkier territory. Technically, she hadn't slept with Paul, not in the literal Clinton definition way. And before Paul, there had been Michael. Things with Michael never crossed the line either, though only because he had gotten cold feet at the last minute. Lana began to realize she was overanalyzing the questions. That could be risky. Lie detectors don't just measure words, they pick up physical tells, heartbeat, sweat, stress levels. Over-preparing might throw off her readings. Still, she practiced answers to the types of questions her simple husband might ask. With most of her nerves under control, she made her way to the airport at the scheduled time. She'd chosen not to share her flight details with anyone. Using the excuse that everyone was busy with work and school, she told them she'd grab a cab. This way, no one could claim they missed her because they were waiting at the wrong terminal. As she stepped past customs, she couldn't help but compare the scene to what she'd once envisioned. She had imagined herself breezing in like a smug, satisfied cat. Instead, she felt like a woman stripped of dignity, returning in desperation. After a long taxi ride, She arrived at the testing site and waited nearly an hour in the reception area before someone finally called her name. The technician walked her through the setup, how they'd use basic questions to calibrate the machine to her physiology. Then he flipped open a folder and paused. "Ah, this one," he said. Lana felt her face warming. Whatever was in that file, it looked like he was about to get a front-row seat to the mess she'd made. "Mrs. Bishop," he said, "these questions aren't standard. They're laid out more like a branching questionnaire." "I'm sorry, what does that mean?" she asked. "Yeah, I've only come across this kind of structure once or twice. It's designed to follow your answers down specific paths." An initial query kicked off the procedure. Depending on the answer, a follow-up would be chosen. It introduced a slight pause in the sequence, yes, but it didn't jeopardize the accuracy of the findings. "Are you ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be," came the reply. The examiner skimmed through the 8 standard baseline prompts, then paused to reopen a file tagged in red. Question 9 appeared. "2 weeks ago, did you fly to Bali with the intention of engaging in an extramarital relationship with Mr. Paul Ainsley?" "Yes." Monitoring the machine's readout, the operator made a quick note before revisiting the file. Lana didn't so much as blink. This question hadn't caught her off guard. She had braced herself for what might follow. Would they probe whether she and Paul had actually slept together? Or dig deeper? Had their involvement begun before the Bali trip? Internally, she pleaded for the question to be phrased in a way that gave her wiggle room. If they asked directly, "Did you sleep with Paul Ainsley?" she could still say no without lying outright. Please let them keep it vague, she thought. The technician then shut the folder and began removing the polygraph printout. "Thank you, Mrs. Bishop. I have your email for the report. You're free to go." To say Lana was stunned would be putting it mildly. That was it? One question? What had just occurred? "Yeah," said the technician, offering a half shrug. "Bit of an odd format. I've only seen this once before. In that case, the person behind the questions had a message to send. Seems like that's what's happening here." "Your husband?" Lana gave a slow, instinctive nod. "What's the point of it?" she asked, confused. "I don't understand." "My take?" the operator replied. "He's telling you that it's not the act itself that matters to him. What he needed to know, what he wanted confirmed, was your intent." The idea alone was enough for him to draw his conclusion. He offered a faint, almost apologetic smile. "Good luck, Mrs. Bishop. There are some top-tier divorce lawyers' cards by the door if you're interested." Dazed and humiliated, Lana drifted out of the office. Her whole strategy had hinged on denying that she'd gone through with anything. It hadn't occurred to her how devastating it would be for Derek to learn that she had considered it, that even her intent could be unforgivable. Furious and wounded, she made a hasty, emotional choice. Rather than reflect or decompress, she hailed a cab and headed straight home. To her, the real confrontation was about to begin. Her instinct to compete took over. Derek had landed the first blow. It was now her turn. When the cab stopped near their cul-de-sac, she climbed out and stormed down the street toward the house. Across the road, 3 figures sat inside a parked car: Derek, their son Dorian, and Dorian's friend. The trio exchanged uneasy, sympathetic glances as they watched her approach the home they used to share. They felt vindicated for preparing the night before. Derek had arranged for her to stay elsewhere, wanting to avoid any explosive argument in front of the kids. That would have caused too much harm. Once Lana was out of sight, they quietly slipped away, heading toward the hotel room that had been booked for her in advance. Phones switched off. Lana remained silent until Monday. There was a sliver of hope that some time apart had given her perspective. That fragile hope vanished late Monday evening when Derek opened a letter from Sierra. The tone was accusatory. She claimed he had turned the children against their mother. She warned that Lana's attorney was moving quickly to file for an emergency custody hearing concerning Dorian and Logan. Sierra also noted that Lana, acting on advice from Jack, had arranged a therapy session for the kids the next day. She proposed a full family meeting for Wednesday evening. Over the weekend, Lana had done what she always did. She planned. She considered every angle, every possible outcome. Her first objective was to try to salvage the marriage Derek had apparently given up on. That started with individual counseling, specifically with a female therapist, hoping she might be more empathetic to Lana's perspective. Next came family therapy, a setting where she could try to explain her actions to the children. Lastly, she prepared for legal battles, positioning herself well if matters escalated. By Tuesday, Lana was already seated in the therapist's office when Derek arrived, just on time. The therapist, a woman in her 40s with a vintage 60s aesthetic, immediately made him feel at ease. The chairs had been arranged to face her, but were spaced widely enough to emphasize the emotional gap between them. They began with introductions. She was simply Lana. He was formally addressed as Mr. Bishop. The therapist, who radiated calm and idealism, gestured for Lana to begin. She launched into the story of their marriage, its early promise, its gradual decline. She cast herself as a faithful wife and devoted mother, until something inside her fractured. She admitted she had misled her family and gone on a date with another man. There had been no physical contact, she insisted, something Derek's surveillance had apparently confirmed, but she acknowledged that her intentions had been unmistakable. She said she was caught completely off guard when Derek cut off her credit cards. Now, filled with remorse, she wanted nothing more than to turn the page and rebuild their life together. The therapist turned her attention to Derek. "I should start by saying that I'm speaking not only for myself, but on behalf of our kids too," he began. "What they're struggling with most is the sense of betrayal. They feel their mother misled them. She used 2 of her 6 yearly vacation weeks to vanish on a solo trip, cutting all lines of communication by leaving behind an emergency number that, as it turned out, couldn't actually be used." He hesitated before continuing. "And just to clear the air, I didn't send anyone to trail Lana while she was in Bali." Lana's face went rigid, stunned. In his position, she would have done exactly that, so hearing he hadn't caught her completely off guard. Derek went on, "Honestly, I didn't want to believe she was being unfaithful. That changed when our youngest stumbled upon her emails and discovered exchanges with the man she was involved with. And for the record, I was told to freeze my credit cards after our oldest found out Lana had been secretly isolating our financial assets, leaving me totally locked out." Lana felt like the ground shifted again. She hadn't known her quiet behind-the-scenes actions had come to light. More disturbing was the realization that her daughters were the ones exposing her. "And whatever outcome Lana's hoping for here," Derek added, his voice turning sharp, "you'll have to forgive me if I can't trust a single thing she says anymore." Only now did the full weight of Derek's anger hit her. Before she could respond, the counselor faced him again. "What would you like to achieve through these sessions?" she asked. "I want to understand what made my wife think it was okay to deceive us all and pursue an affair," Derek answered flatly. Despite everything, a sliver of hope remained. Perhaps they could still repair what was broken. But then, almost under her breath, the counselor murmured, "Oh, we've got ourselves a dinosaur." That one line shattered it all. In that instant, Derek's worst suspicion crystallized, that Lana had handpicked a therapist who'd quietly undermine any attempt at reconciliation, pushing them toward divorce instead. He'd heard about counselors like this, ones who chose sides instead of mediating. His temper surged, and he stood up and left the room without saying another word. There was still a faint possibility for repair. If Lana had followed him, apologized, made some effort, things might have played out differently. But instead, she redirected her outrage toward the counselor. Her anger poured out unchecked, long after Derek had disappeared down the hall. Though shaken, the therapist kept her composure. She rescheduled a solo appointment with Lana for the following week. She also contacted Derek separately, took responsibility for her unprofessional comment, and offered to meet with him one-on-one. This was their 3rd mandatory session. After this, they'd decide whether to continue counseling or walk away from it altogether. The family gathering the next evening turned into yet another catastrophe. at least from Lana's perspective. She seemed unable to grasp one brutal truth. Once trust is broken, it doesn't just fracture, it fossilizes, like ancient bones entombed in a forgotten display. She had invited everyone to dinner ahead of the discussion. Sierra, her oldest, rejected the offer curtly, remarking that Lana had never been able to cook properly anyway. But she did confirm they'd all arrive by 7:30. Lana tried welcoming them with hugs at the door, but the reception was cold and stiff. She made the strategic error of sitting last, only to discover that she'd ended up physically separated, seated on a step below the rest of the family on the couch. She looked to Sierra for some kind of gesture, a shift in seating, a sign of connection. Sierra didn't move an inch. Feeling the sting of rejection, Lana launched into the remarks she'd practiced. But her tone missed the mark. There was no real apology, only rationalizations. She insisted she hadn't truly done anything wrong. She spoke of being undervalued, not just as a partner, but as the main breadwinner. She claimed her husband's affection had grown dull, that she felt invisible, and when someone younger paid her attention, she admitted, she gave in to it. She tried appealing to Dorian and Logan, their sons, but couldn't bring herself to look Derek in the eye. Meanwhile, Sierra curled up on the couch, arms around her knees, scribbling furiously in a notebook with a tight scowl. The silence from the others, whom Lana had now started to think of as a unified front, choked her words. Then Sierra spoke. "Unbelievable, Mom. Just, wow. You did it again." "What do you mean?" Lana asked, completely thrown. "Your whole monologue," Sierra said flatly. "I'd rate it at about 85% cliché. If you'd added something like, 'None of this would have happened if nobody found out,' I'd give you the full 100. No one could quite tell if Lana's face turned red from guilt or rage, but the hit landed. The painful part was that somewhere in her subconscious, she had intended to say that. She'd simply forgotten. Right then, she knew. Any chance of sympathy from her children was gone. As long as Derek held their trust, they wouldn't hear her. "Derek, kitchen, now!" she snapped. Once the door shut behind them, she turned on him, voice low and sharp with accusation. "Is this what you want? To see me broken and crawling, begging for scraps of dignity?" He looked at her, not furious, just profoundly weary. For the first time, he saw it for what it was. She hadn't grown or changed. She was still ruled by impulse. "No," he said gently. "It doesn't have to be this way at all. If you had chosen to act with the basic decency anyone could recognize, none of this needed to be inevitable. But if you're determined to cling to that manipulative woman you've dubbed your neutral advisor, then I'll see you in court, Derek." On Thursday, Derek settled into a new rental, 3 bedrooms, modest but serviceable. It was clear this wasn't the end of anything, just another turning point. That same day, he received notice. The preliminary custody hearing for Dorian and Logan had been scheduled for the upcoming Tuesday. When he found out who the presiding family court judge would be, he immediately phoned Jack. Jack's tone was upbeat. He said Derek had lucked out, drawing the same judge who had previously ruled against his own father during his divorce. Derek declined Jack's offer to act as legal counsel, but did arrange to meet him over the weekend to discuss courtroom expectations, what would be allowed, what should be avoided. This time, he planned to stay within the lines, at least initially. He believed he was doing what any responsible parent would do to protect his children's well-being. Over the weekend, they worked on making the new place feel like home, a space they could get excited about. At the kitchen table, Derek gathered the kids and openly shared what lay ahead, both short-term and long-term. The children lit up with excitement, drawn in by the vision. Together, they scoured the internet for things they'd need to furnish the house. By the time Tuesday arrived, Lana's attorney was clearly caught off guard to learn Derek would be representing himself. It became evident that Lana wasn't entirely comfortable with the prospect of being directly questioned by the man she was fighting in court. Due to delays in the docket, only procedural matters were addressed that day. The judge ordered everyone to return the following morning. That evening, word of the contentious case began to spread. By the next morning, a few local reporters showed up. clearly more curious than occupied. When court resumed, Lana's lawyer opened with a review of assets, income comparisons, and related background information. Then Derek stood for his cross-examination, and Lana's composure began to erode, something the gathered journalists were quick to pick up on. He began slowly, carefully. "Would you agree that I physically constructed our house by hand?" "Yes, you did. But I was the main breadwinner. Didn't you return to work just a couple months after each child was born?" "That's true." "And who in general handled breakfast, packed their school lunches, and made dinner?" "You did. I worked late most nights." "Would you describe me as their primary caregiver?" "Probably, yes." "You also recently lied to both me and the children, and then flew off to Bali for 2 weeks with another man, didn't you?" "Objection, Your Honor," Lana's attorney interjected. "Infidelity is not a factor in custody determinations." "I understand, Your Honor. I'm not making this about cheating. I'm raising concerns about the character of someone claiming parental fitness." "Objection overruled," the judge responded. Derek turned back to Lana. "So you went to Bali under false pretenses with a coworker, correct?" "Yes. I needed time off. It just happened that my colleague came along." "When you left for that trip, didn't you leave a letter for me?" Without waiting for her to answer, he read the note aloud. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed several reporters scribbling intently. Lana said nothing, her eyes burning with quiet fury. "After you came back from what I can only call a betrayal, did you ever apologize, to me or to the kids, for lying and leaving like that?" Lana's silence spoke volumes. Derek turned to the bench. "Your Honor, the facts are simple. I've always been the main caretaker for our children. I built the house they live in. I never broke our family trust, and I never deceived them. She's demonstrated clearly that she doesn't deserve authority over them." He returned to his seat, refusing to meet Lana's gaze. She stared daggers into the back of his head. The judge, now fully engaged, issued her decision swiftly. According to her, the prevailing research showed that children typically fared better with their mothers after a separation. Lana was granted temporary custody along with the family residence. Her smile was tight, almost smug. Derek didn't react. This was precisely the outcome he'd predicted after speaking to Jack. He stood. "Your Honor, may I make one final statement? I'd like to reference several precedents: Harper vs. Harper, Sorrell vs. Sorrell, Fulton v. Fulton, all of which awarded custody based on the parent who provided the primary care." Receiving no response, he went on. He cited 3 academic studies that directly challenged the belief that children always benefit more from staying with their mother. "What exactly are you getting at, Mr. Bishop?" the judge asked. "I just want to know, Your Honor," he said steadily, "if a man with a penis can expect a fair ruling in this courtroom." The judge said nothing. Derek held her gaze. A beat passed before she silently closed the case and moved on to the next. Reporters scratched furiously in their notebooks. Derek calmly handed each of them a copy of the letter Lana had written, then exited the courtroom without a backward glance. Lana's attorney came over to congratulate her on the outcome, but she didn't feel like she'd won anything. Derek's words, his cold accusation that she felt no remorse, still rang in her ears, but she wasn't ready to let the cracks show. Winning mattered more. Holding Lana's smug expression responsible for the collapse of their marriage, Derek mentally reviewed the short list of people he believed had crossed serious ethical lines, and who, in his view, needed to be held accountable. 3 names stood out, and his plans for dealing with each were already underway. He had discussed the situation with Sierra, who had offered insightful feedback, prompting him to revise his methods. One of her suggestions turned out to be better than his initial approach. Later that day, Derek used a contact within the federal network to file a formal grievance with the president of the federal judiciary, accusing a certain judge of displaying bias. With that step taken, he waited at home for Dorian and Logan to return from school. When he asked them to stay with their mother for the next 2 nights, they didn't push back. Before they left, He gave them specific items essential to the next part of his plan. The following morning, 2 damning newspaper stories appeared, both casting Lana and the judge in a harsh light. Derek carefully cut out the articles, scanned them, and sent them off via a deliberately indirect chain of intermediaries. By midweek, Lana felt a rare sense of relief when she made it home before dusk. Dorian and Logan were already there, though their presence seemed more about making a point than showing affection. When they responded to her questions, their answers were clipped and minimal. She had to nudge them repeatedly, almost begging to help pack their school lunches. It had been so long since she'd done it herself, she realized she didn't even remember what to include. With nothing suitable in the fridge or pantry, she handed them cash for cafeteria meals instead. At 4 p.m., she changed clothes and left for her individual counseling session scheduled for 5. There, she outlined the terms under which she might be open to reconciling with Derek. This conversation took the first 30 minutes. The rest of the lesson was devoted to analyzing the history of their relationship. Lana said that before meeting Paul, she had emotionally inadequate relationships with 2 other men, one colleague, the other neighbor. She insisted that there was no intimacy in any of these situations, although she did not mention that in both previous cases abstinence was not her choice. She genuinely wondered why Derek had become so attached to her, since, from her point of view, no real betrayal had occurred. The counselor said she would bring Lana's conditions to Derek, but warned that a reconciliation seemed unlikely. She emphasized that Derek appeared more wounded by Lana's hidden motives and dishonesty than by any physical act. The next day's session with Derek was terse, intense, and unsettling. When asked about his goals, Derek presented the counselor with 2 blunt options. She could either refer him to another therapist, one who didn't rationalize emotional infidelity, or she could formally declare that the marriage was beyond saving. Worried that her session with Lana might later be used against her professionally, the counselor quickly submitted paperwork officially stating that the relationship was irreparably broken. She knew another professional complaint could end her career. That evening, Derek arrived home to find Dorian and Logan already back, acting like they had never left. Shortly after, a police officer knocked on the door, informing Derek that he was in violation of a family court mandate. Derek remained calm, pointing out that he had not breached any order. The children had made their own decision. He warned that forcibly removing them would constitute assault. The officer asked the kids to come with him, but they stood their ground. The officer left to seek further direction. A few minutes later, he returned, just as Lana burst into the house. "Derek, don't make this any worse than it has to be," she said. "Tell Dorian and Logan to come with me. Give me the house, and I'll be fair with custody and property." "Lana," Derek said evenly, "please leave my home. I won't pressure the kids into making a choice they don't believe in." She tried to appeal to him. "Derek, come on. You know I'm not some villain." "That's the thing, Lana," he replied. "I don't know you, not anymore. The woman I married wouldn't have done what you did, and if somehow she had, she'd at least have felt guilty. But instead, you went to our counselor and tried to make her convince me to just accept it, as if those were my only 2 options. Tolerate your betrayal or lose everything. And now I hear there were 2 others before Paul? Explain that to me, Lana. What did I ever do to deserve this? What are you trying to do now?" Color drained from Lana's face as she realized what had happened. The counselor had disclosed what she'd said in confidence. Though anger surged through her, guilt prevented her from lashing out at Derek. Her blame shifted to the counselor, who she now saw as the real traitor. She wasn't allowed to share that, Lana snapped bitterly. Derek didn't respond. He neither confirmed nor denied the accusation. Without another word, Lana turned and stormed out. Afterward, Derek found the small device Dorian had hidden in Lana's purse before the counseling session and deleted its contents. He was confident the counselor's reckoning was coming, and he was right. 3 days later, she was officially dismissed from her position. 1 name crossed off, 2 remained. Child Protective Services arrived that Saturday morning, only to retreat defeated and exasperated. It was quickly apparent that removing the children would require force. They clung to their home, unwilling to leave, ready to fight if necessary. They misjudged the situation by applying logic to something that was entirely driven by emotion, Chief Officer later reflected. Although the court had determined the children should reside with their mother, the kids saw that decision as a grave mistake. "Dorian and I aren't leaving," one of them declared firmly. "We don't want to live with someone who hurt our dad and lied to us." And with that, the matter was closed, at least in their eyes. Over the following days, Lana launched a campaign to reclaim her children's trust. She flooded them with texts, emails, and voicemails, reaching out constantly. None of it made a dent. Eventually, they stopped opening her messages altogether, deleting them on arrival. She attempted to speak with Derek, but once it was clear she wasn't calling to apologize, he ended the call. Recognizing she was making no progress, Derek moved forward and retained Jack as his attorney for the divorce proceedings. He also contacted Sierra's workplace to verify the legal counsel she had previously offered. By the end of that week, Sierra informed him that Lana was about to leave for yet another business trip, this one lasting 7 days. Seizing the opportunity her absence presented, Derek used his paid leave to become the children's full-time caretaker. He took over their routines seamlessly, managing school drop-offs, meals, and household tasks with meticulous attention. When Lana came back the next Friday, the scope of Derek's strategy became immediately evident. As she pulled into the driveway, she froze, stunned. The yard had been transformed, newly manicured, featuring a suspended pool and a freshly built brick garage. Everything appeared carefully planned. But what truly shocked her was what wasn't there. The sleek, award-winning modular home she had adored was gone. In its place stood a deteriorated, borderline uninhabitable structure. It turned out that the new building had been bought at a discount from an insurance salvage sale, a transport-damaged shell no one else had wanted. Still reeling, Lana entered using a new key. Derek had changed the locks and stepped into what remained of her life. Her clothes, select furniture, and personal belongings were all inside, as he'd promised. Overwhelmed, her emotions spiraled from rage to grief to disbelief. For one brief moment, sorrow took hold. On the floor, just inside the door, she found a document, the property title. The deed spelled it out plainly, ownership of the land and all structures at the given address. In that moment, she realized she had been thoroughly outmaneuvered. She still owned the land, technically, and yes, a house stood there. But the dream home she'd once called hers had vanished. She called her lawyer in a panic, hoping there might be legal options left, but her fears were soon confirmed. There was nothing to contest. After a long silence with herself, she contacted her financial advisor in hopes of revising the only asset she still believed she could control, a trust involving undeveloped land. But even there, she found herself defeated. Sierra, acting within her legal rights, had already transferred ownership into her own name. The blow landed hard. Lana's final coherent thought before unraveling into bitterness was a painful reckoning with her own pride, the assumption that her children would always choose her side. But she had lost every one of them. Derek, for tearing down the house she believed was hers. The children, for turning away. For a fleeting moment, she almost accepted the truth of how deeply she had failed them, but the clarity didn't last. Self-pity curdled once again into resentment. She sent a message to all 3 children. "Do you really hate me that much?" Only one reply came back, steady and unshaken. "We don't hate you. You always knew I would do anything to protect our family. It's just heartbreaking that now I have to protect them from you." It was signed, Derek. Lana gathered what belongings she still had and checked herself into a motel. On the way there, she detoured through Sierra's neighborhood, just to confirm the suspicion already forming in her mind. Sure enough, she found what she expected, the sleek, modular components of her former home, now sitting neatly in Sierra's yard, waiting to be reassembled. That Monday at work, she was handed a delivery, divorce papers from Derek. Included was a note apologizing for sending them to her office, explaining he had no idea where else she might be staying. She spent the next hour poring over the documents, searching desperately for hidden traps or clauses. At first glance, it appeared generous. He was offering her sole ownership of the jointly acquired property, which represented most of their liquid assets, as the rest were locked in long-term structures. But as she read further, the deductions began to appear. The property's valuation had been reduced by several expenses, among them the cost of her trip to Bali, which Derek argued had been paid for using misappropriated marital funds. Added to that were legal fees from the divorce, and her share of the projected interest on the children's trusts for the next 2 and 5 years, penalties tied directly to her financial maneuvering. Custody, according to the document, would be determined by the children themselves. If Dorian and Logan chose differently, then Logan, the younger of the two, would decide in order to keep the siblings together. In a last-ditch move, Lana phoned her financial advisor, asking if she could dissolve the trusts set up for the children. The answer was unequivocal: no. Derek had ensured they were sealed tightly. Her attorney then attempted to request a new family counselor, but the existing one had already ratified the marital agreement, and changing counselors now required Derek's approval. When her lawyer submitted that request, Derek's response was cool and concise. He had proposed an alternate counselor weeks earlier, but Lana had dismissed the idea outright. Given that, and with her current push appearing more like a strategic reaction than sincere concern, the opportunity to renegotiate had passed. Lana signed the last document with a calm, calculated breath, knowing this was as favorable an outcome as she could hope for. The family court, predictably aligned with her, had awarded her primary custody of Dorian and Logan, securing her oversight of the children's trust accounts. Aside from forfeiting the second home, she'd held her ground. Once the paperwork was finalized, the divorce concluded swiftly. Her lawyer assured her the same judge, now presiding over both parties, would handle any further matters. The judge's reputation for bias was no secret. He often advised his male clients facing her to settle quickly and avoid a drawn-out defeat. Everything had played out just as Lana had envisioned, a strategic, albeit cold, triumph that would leave Derek in shambles. For a fleeting moment, she let herself exhale. Maybe, once reality settled in, Derek's pride would crack and he'd crawl back, desperate. If he did, she might allow it, but only on her terms. Otherwise, he could enjoy the silence of rock bottom alone. 4 weeks on, Lana entered the courtroom again, her poise seemingly intact, but her confidence faltered when her lawyer pulled her aside with a furrowed brow. He gestured discreetly toward a sharply dressed woman sitting up front. "Recognize her?" he murmured. "We went through law school together. I've heard she's now with the chief federal judge. This doesn't feel right." His unease settled over Lana like a chill. When court resumed, the judge, her tone clipped and her expression weary, announced that this case would be her last before early retirement. Her displeasure was palpable. Then came the arguments. Lana immediately contested Derek's demand that she pay all legal fees. Derek countered by proposing they each cover the other's costs. Lana's attorney rebutted, noting Derek's lawyer had been working without pay. From that point, the momentum shifted. Jack, representing Derek, painted a precise and persuasive picture of both parents' qualifications. Lana's counsel, caught off guard and light on evidence, could only scramble. It became clear that relying on routine procedure rather than solid preparation had been a critical error. The case was slipping, and fast. The judgment came just before noon. The judge, visibly tense and frequently glancing toward the woman in the front row, announced her verdict. Derek would receive full custody, presented as the more capable and stable parent. She made a stiff, insincere nod to his fair approach in dividing the assets, and wished him well in raising the children with his portion of the estate. Lana sat frozen, mute with disbelief, barely registering the final rap of the gavel. Back in her small one-bedroom flat, she felt as though she'd been knocked over by a ghost. But she couldn't dwell. There was still one last property deal to wrap up. Preparing for what she knew would be a rough financial road, Lana had put her former house on the market. Built on a steep incline with a layout tailored to a unique vision, the property wasn't easily adaptable, and it was priced accordingly. Unless the new owners replicated Derek's meticulous landscaping and architectural blueprint, the place would need a total overhaul. Later that day, she arrived to hand over the deed, intending to offer a polite farewell to whoever bought the place. But the man present told her he was just a go-between. The actual buyers were on their way. As she hesitated, wondering whether to stay, Derek's vehicle pulled up, leading a line of trucks hauling the house, and a crane. Lana didn't speak. She just turned and walked away. Back in her flat, she stared at the modest check in her hand, all that was left of a once comfortable life. In a fog, she opened the journal a friend had recommended she use to process everything. With a red marker, she scrawled, "Next time the itch hits, try ointment. If you screw up, apologize immediately. You're smarter than you act. Prove it." Roughly 2 months after the sale closed, Lana returned to the property with a bottle of champagne in hand, a gesture of reconciliation. She was finally ready to let go and offer a sliver of grace. So, what do you think, reader? Searching for a lesson in all this? Well, here's something to chew on. Whenever people involve a third party, be it a therapist, an idealistic lawyer, or even the well-meaning neighbor, in their personal wars, they also hand over the steering wheel. If there's any chance of managing your conflicts directly, do it. And above all else, treat those closest to you with dignity and kindness. Not sure if this next bit holds true everywhere, but it certainly applies here. Watch whose toes you tread on. They might be attached to the backside you'll need to kiss later. And since this isn't a story spun out of the US, but one flavored with a distinctly Australian sensibility, or, as we say, a touch of strine, it comes with its own local seasoning. For the unfamiliar, a stream is still a stream, but going to the scrub means you're clearing out. Aussies aren't exactly known for bowing to authority. Our politicians often puff themselves up more than they should. And ironically, many of our most iconic leaders have also been our cheekiest rule benders. Take the 70s, for instance. We had a prime minister named Gough Whitlam, that is. During a live television interview, he was backed into a corner by a tenacious journalist who was hell-bent on getting a clear response about his views on abortion. Like many politicians, Gough had always chosen to sidestep such divisive topics, preferring ambiguity to controversy. But this reporter wasn't willing to let the matter drop. Eventually, the relentless questioning wore him down. In a moment of frustration, and under the glare of the cameras, he snapped, "Miss, I'm in favor of abortion, and in your particular case, I might even suggest it be applied retroactively." The statement ignited a storm across the media landscape, but, oddly enough, his approval ratings skyrocketed by 20 points overnight. Apologies for my recent absence. I've been behind bars. I've long been captivated by legends of forgotten champions, and not too long ago, I stumbled upon the tale of a young Dutch boy who saved his village by plugging a hole in a dike with just his finger. I'll spare you the full account, but the story struck a chord with me and stirred something deep inside. So, I decided to follow in his footsteps in my own way. With any luck, and if I keep my nose clean, I should be out in about 6 months. Our story has come to an end. What do you think about this story? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed the way I tell stories, head over to my channel and check out my other videos. May the force be with you. See you soon, my friend.